Welcome to the Westminster Effects Doxology Podcast, where we exist for the glory of God and the tone of his people. I'm Cody Fields, the president of Westminster Effects. Go buy stuff for your guitar at westminstereffects.com and join the discussion in the Westminster Effects Doxology Podcast Lounge. And you know the drill. Subscribe, share, put it in your Instagram story or what have you. Give us 5 stars on the podcast service of your choice. I am not joined by the Right Reverend Bradley Cox. He is celebrating his 25th wedding anniversary this week. Good for him. Lutheran John had a work thing. His reason isn't as cool. But via the interwebs, I'm joined by
Cory Truax. I'm speaking of those interwebs, just real quick. I got some lag from you, so if I end up breaking up, we'll figure something out. Just you have warning as we start. But I'm here because I'm one of the elders of a Southern Baptist church, and I go to the annual meeting every year, and I was there last week in Indianapolis.
Yes, so this is our annual tradition. What is this, our 4th year doing this or something like that? And so it's the Southern Baptist Convention is tremendously important. It is the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. Yeah. And as goes the SBC, so goes much of Christian evangelicalism, at least within Orthodoxy, right? Not talking about the mainstream denominations that went off the rails decades ago. But the SBC is tremendously important. Why don't you give the people an idea of why they're so important in the first place, other than just being large?
I'll give you my top 3 reasons why they are important. Number 1, if you count up the number of graduates our seminaries are going to put out in the next 10 years, we don't dwarf all the other seminaries put together, but we do exceed them. There will be more pastors coming out of Southern Baptist seminaries than there will be any other seminaries. So if Southern Baptist theology goes wrong, the next generations, your kids and your kids and your kids' pastors are going to be wrong on things. So we're producing the most church leaders in the country. 2, we are still, and this one we do dwarf everybody, in how much money is going to go to foreign missions. I think everyone that goes to the annual meeting every year says that's our highlight. Our most unifying moment is the 45 minutes or so that you are introduced to the new 70 or 80 missionaries that are going often to places that the gospel has never been heard, or they're going to places that it has been heard and it is dangerous to be there. So at least they're important because we produce the theology in the seminaries. We are sending out the missionaries. And while we are not the number 1 church planting organization, we are a top 3 church planting organization. That's NAM, North American Mission Board, which we will talk about, has its challenges. But that's why we are significant in the landscape of evangelicalism.
So tremendously important. And also, for the record, it's a denomination, we can be honest, but it's not a denomination in the technical sense.
No, and that's important. I mean, that we would be different. Right. There'd be some things different happening if we were a denomination. But we are independent churches that just decide to cooperate.
Right. And so one of the big issues in terms of that cooperation over the last several years has been the definition of elder, pastor, overseer, and the fact that biblically it is reserved for biblically qualified men. And so that's already in the Baptist faith and message, but there was an amendment that I believe passed last year and needed to pass again this year in order to be adopted, and it got 61% of the vote, which is good. But it needed 2/3 to actually be adopted by the SBC. It's called the Law Amendment because the guy who wrote it, Mike Law. So what's the deal with the Law Amendment? What were some of the arguments for and against? And why did it not pass?
At least 3 thoughts for me on the Law Amendment. 1, I was disappointed, of course. I voted for it. We voted for it last year. The arguments against, I heard people saying at least these 2 or 3 things. One of the argument from need was highly used. So they would cite, over the last 2 conventions, we expelled, not technically expelled because we're not a denomination, but we stopped being in friendly cooperation with 4 or 5 churches over this issue. So whatever this effort is that you guys got going, we don't even need it. When people flaunt the rules, we stop fellowshipping with them. They're no longer included in our cooperation. So there was the argument from need. I heard a couple folks were affected by the argument. I think this was a small group that said it is predominantly our it is our majority Black churches that call women pastors more often. And so I don't want to vote for this because it is disproportionately affecting congregations that are primarily Black. I don't think that was a huge group, but I did hear that from overhearing, and also just saw it on the Twitters. So there was the argument from me. There was an argument of disproportionate effect on minority churches, and honestly, after that, I think it was in baseball, tie goes to the runner. It's the idea here is, if we already have something in the language, we love our Baptist faith and message. Why touch it? Why change it? It apparently is strong enough as it is. That was their arguments. I'll add one more addendum. The actual view of complementarianism, or even some other views that I go one step further, is like a patriarchy. That the vote on removing the churches is more reflective of Southern Baptist theology. The Southern Baptists have now voted out I think it's 4 or 5 churches at 91%, 92% margins. So just the day before the law amendment, 91% of Southern Baptists said, yeah, we're not fellowshipping with First Baptist Alexandria, Virginia anymore. You are obviously outside of Orthodoxy in Southern Baptist world. I think we have a 10% theology problem, not a 40% theology problem. We just had a 30% of people who were compelled by those arguments.
So this one of the arguments that I've heard decrying the fact that the law amendment didn't pass is this First Baptist Alexandria, Virginia. It took 40 years to kick them out or something like that is what I've heard.
You're right. No, this has been too long. I think now that this wheel has gotten squeaky, the credentials committee, the one who decides who can be seated and who doesn't, now has to pay closer attention to this. So people had to make noise first. I mean, the institutions are going to side on the side of bigger fellowship, not smaller. And so we, the messengers, had to go and say to our institutions, pay attention to this. It is very important. And so now that the law amendment was passed one year, not passed the other, this will open some conversations. I already see it in some private Facebook groups of churches who do have a music pastor, and it's a woman. And then they have a children's pastor, youth pastor, that they have as a woman, and changing those titles. Things move slowly. We only meet once a year, but I think we will move that direction.
And most of those churches that have a quote unquote children's pastor or worship pastor or whatever, it's as we say at Resurrection, we call them ministers. They're not elders, right? So the term minister, no issues there.
So for us, we don't actually call them pastors or ministers at all. Maybe we'll even call them leaders, youth leaders, because the men who led that in our context in the past, it's been men, but they also aren't elder qualified. They are qualified to go lead teenagers. They're qualified to disciple teenagers, but not qualified as elders. So it's not just a distinction about women. It's a distinction about this tiny little group of people who will ultimately be elders in the church.
And so most of those churches that do have those women with those titles would pretty immediately clean stuff up.
I think that's going to be the heart of it, I hope. And where it's not the heart of it, where I tend to be an inclusion guy, to me, this is an issue so serious that credentials committee people need to be willing to say we are not in friendly cooperation with these churches who won't change.
And I think professional transition here. The new president may be a guy to actually implement some of those changes.
First, that segue was
you are
fantastic.
Welcome for that.
Clint Presley was just elected. This is another evidence that anyone that says the Southern Baptist is drifting because of this women's pastor issue. Yeah, we just elected one of the most pro-law amendment candidates. There were six candidates. And there were 4 hardcore law amendment people. And I would argue this as well. In that first ballot, the guy who was kind of made me nervous, he's a mega church pastor in Nashville. He was anti-law amendment. His profile online is huge. And I thought, I really don't want this guy to be president of the SBC. I think he would nominate people to weaken our institutions. That dude finished fifth, the big mega church out of six. And so actually the people who finished fifth and sixth in the first round of voting were the only two anti-law amendment people.
Do you think the fact that, one, you have the law amendment, the anti-law amendment people getting soundly defeated in that presidential election, but also the fact that you're talking about the big megachurch guys, do you think there's some theological populism going on here?
I do. Amongst this convention, I've noticed, to me, there was a turning point in Nashville in 2021 on how many of those folks are showing up. When I say those folks, I mean the profile of Messenger is becoming a little more rural and suburban, and the profile of Messenger is becoming smaller church over time. And so, yes, I think there is a rejection of celebrity pastorism amongst messengers.
Right. Good. I think that's ultimately a healthy thing. With downsides, of course.
Sure. The thing you don't want to have movements based on personalities, because personalities fail. Unfortunately, it just happens too often. You want power spread out, and you want influence spread out. On this president, Clint Presley, for those who don't know how it works for the Baptists, the president's primary role, the one that can change things over time, is the president appoints the people to, this is so Baptist, appoints the people to the committee that appoints all the other committees. And so if this guy at the top is putting bad people on this, or non-theologically conservative people at that top committee, then that's going to fill the trustees and the committees for Southern Seminary and for NAM and for IMB. They'll start choosing the wrong type of trustee and the wrong type of committee members. And this guy's solidly theologically conservative, so I think he's going to pick the right people.
Right. So Clint Presley, I've seen some criticism from him online, typically from, and this is one of those things where we've gone back and forth of that he's a solidly conservative guy as far as I'm aware, but he's nicer about it. Right.
Yeah.
He's very even keel, still a Big Tent guy, but, you know, I've even seen the term company man where he's not going to rock the boat too hard. But some of this comes down to tactics versus strategy and all that kind of stuff where you made a great point, was that a week or two ago on your podcast, that we want to be joyful when we advocate for our positions. We don't want to turn people off from our positions because we're being ogres. so
yes. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think whoever called him a company man, that's the right word. My elder brother and I were sitting around the pool a couple weeks before the convention, and I said, I think Clint Presley's going to win. And my prediction was simply based on the fact that he was the candidate most like the current president. And Bart Barber, the guy that's cycling out now, I call him a company man. Just, we love Baptist life, has a good attitude towards the brethren of various theological positions. And so he's a hard person not to like. There are some in Southern Baptist life that take stances with a tone that it's easy for me to look at them and go, I don't like you much. You're cantankerous. I don't want people like you to be in charge of things. Like we went to, while we were there, we went to a lunch by Founders with their Tom Askell.
Yep.
You know Tom Askell well. He was a Southern Baptist. One of the guys there, like William Wolf. I love Founders. I love Tom Askell. But William Wolf was there, and one of those personalities I just go, I just hope you never get influence over anything. You're just so nasty about stuff. And I'd say it to his face. I kind of wish I could say it to his face. I have said it to him on Twitter, and I think he blocked me. So there are people that, even like me, I voted for the first round for the most solid guy. His name was Jared. I forgot his name. Jared Moore, I think, maybe. And he got 10% of the vote. And he is the most theologically conservative, and even his temperament's not my favorite. But after he was eliminated, what seemed to happen is the most conservative person with the most pleasant temperament rose to the top.
So here's one thing, just real quick, because I'm thinking about it right now, because you said Bart Barber. As far as I can tell, great guy. However, one thing that really rubbed me the wrong way is he did a panel discussion on quote unquote Christian nationalism with some of like the wokest people on the planet. And it's like, what are we doing? Like I'm not accusing Barber of being a closet liberal or anything like that. But if you want to give ammo to the guys who say that there is this hard leftward drift in the SBC, you do things like have panels on Christian nationalism. You create a straw man and you do it with universalists and stuff like that.
Huh. I had not heard that or seen it, and I would love to know the content, because I know I would show up to a panel and then speak some truth into it with people that I disagree with, but not. I mean, if he's capitulating, that would have been very discouraging. I should also mention, though, the Christian nationalism thing is a hotly contested issue inside Southern Baptist life. One of the resolutions we affirmed, I wouldn't have voted for it. The resolution was called on Christian liberty. And that language was, I wish it could have just been called, "We're not the Christian nationalists resolution." It was to clarify Baptist stance is not that the church take over the government. It's not that there's a melding of the two. We want to say we're not Christian nationalists. And I don't know how broadly that passed. It wasn't a ballot vote. It was just a put your ballots in the air vote. And so that's just hotly contested right now. And I think all inside orthodoxy. I think, Owen Strachan. I love Owen Strachan. He's got like an 80-page PDF out right now about Christian nationalism. I haven't made it through, but I find myself agreeing and disagreeing with parts of it and wanting to add this category. I'm actually about to do my show in a little while and talk about this. The category of your theological view of how the government and religion interacts. Put it at least in the category of how we talk about baptism and stop being so nasty about it. Put it in the category of how we talk about eschatology and stop being so daggum nasty about it. Like, some folks have taken politics, government, religion, have taken it's now a first order issue. And if you don't see it that way, you're probably a heretic or a liberal. And it's not helpful.
Yeah. A heretic, a liberal, or a Christian nationalist, right? Because it comes from both sides, like with this whole after party garbage with David French and Russell Moore and those types. And
the thing they produced is hot garbage.
Right. Which, speaking of Russell Moore, former head of the ERLC, I'm just full of these fantastic transitions today. So Tom Ascol, as we previously mentioned, Tom Ascol of Founders Ministries, great ministry, by the way. I've sincerely appreciated a lot of Tom Ascol's efforts and whatnot, but he introduced a motion to abolish the ERLC, and I think it's eventually going to happen. As we see the votes, it's more and more. There's less and less margin, right? So that's snowballing over the years. And he accused Brent Leatherwood of some shenanigans. I really was taken aback by Brent Leatherwood's response. Particularly, it was not good, particularly with the fact that Tom Ascol outright said, "Hey, you opposed an equal protection bill," I think it was in Louisiana, that would outlaw the unjust murder of the preborn. And Brent Leatherwood did not touch that. Like, he just totally avoided it.
He didn't respond.
He also, and if I recall correctly, he has been at the forefront of trying to not release the manifesto of the trans shooter at Covenant Christian School in Nashville. Which why would we not want to expose that darkness there? What are we doing?
Yeah. I'm part of the story of that snowball. I went to my first annual meeting in 2017 in Phoenix, and I found the people who were asking for the abolition of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission to be both obnoxious and tiny. And when that motion even happened, there was even some boos in the room.
Wow.
When it was actually put up to a vote. I mean, it was a smattering of ballots in the air. I'm talking maybe a couple hundred out of 10,000 people. And I have voted against that or opposed even voting on it. 2017, 18, 19, we didn't have 120 because of COVID. 21, 22, 23. I've had this in front of me 6 times and thought the Ethics and Religious Commission is not perfect. They do decent work. This was my first yay vote. You know what? And here was why. Because to abolish one of our entities, that's what they're called, it takes 2 votes in 2 consecutive years. So you have to vote to abolish it, come back and do it again. I wanted to affirm the vote so that the trustees of the ERLC and Brent Leatherwood could see, guys, this is your warning.
Right.
You have been warned. Get your act together. Because I actually love the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. I think it's very important. I don't want to abolish it, but I want it to do its work.
Right.
And I want it to represent the vast majority of people in Southern Baptist churches. And right now, the work it's doing doesn't in a lot of ways. So I do hope this. I noticed that Brent Leatherwood, when he made his response, he was at one of the mics at the front of the room. So when the vote happened, he had to watch. And this is the first time a sea of ballots. So much so that I thought if we would have taken a ballot, I have to write it down, I bet that margin was 3-4 points. It was that close. And I hope he took that to heart. I hope he goes to bed every night and sees all those ballots going in the air and recognize, I got to switch something here.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this is another one of those instances where the SBC is not drifting leftward. However, you have these little pockets of guys like the ERLC where why did you even go there? The thing that Askell pointed out of what was it? Animal rights are a pro-life issue, which is just such postmodern redefining of terms. It's silly.
Yeah, that's. I think I've said this to you many times. Institutions drift one hire at a time. Mm-hmm. Every time you include somebody, you're making a risk. That video, he did respond to that video. Leatherwood did, and say that video was up for a little while. We took it down. Once it came to our attention. But the issue there being, well, you did hire somebody who did it.
Right.
Like, how did that person get through your process to put this thing together? And that's what I think he needs to hear. You have to be sharper, or this isn't gonna work out.
Right. There's I think this is true pretty much everywhere conservatives are. But it's particularly true in the church is we often err on the side of allowing leftists to just kind of do what they do for the sake of not having them freak out for the next 10 minutes. And we often it's the coddle left and punch right kind of thing. Is if someone is a little too conservative for us, we often come down with a hammer on them. Where if it's a sin like racism, right? Like if you substitute for any of the language that certain entities like the ERLC are using for things like homosexuality, and you just plug in racist or something like that, and like our minds would just melt, and and rightfully so.
There's a clear double standard here on what sins get the focus.
That's what I was trying to say.
This temptation to over-cooperate is particularly strong in the Southern Baptist Convention because we are a convention, not a denomination. Right. One of the themes you'll hear in microphones from messengers and from people on the platform just tends to be, is this so important that it would hinder our furtherance of the gospel? We all come together and meet and give money to send missionaries and to plant churches. That's what we're here for. Why are you guys fighting so much about these other things? Right. We are a gospel place. And so it's particularly strong for us because the door in and the door out is not as high or it's not as hard as being a Presbyterian or something like that. But I mean, a lot of us are coming to the conclusion, particularly let's say NAM. I don't want to plant churches if you aren't going to be like the churches the solid churches we already have. Are you planting garbage churches? Right. So these churches have to have these doctrinal statements. In the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, one of the important parts of spreading the gospel is equipping churches to think rightly about confusing things in our world. And if you are not helping that process of thinking rightly, thinking biblically, I don't know what you're doing and why we would give you any resources.
Right. And since you brought up the North American Mission Board planting bad churches, upstate pastor Rhett Burns, former sports information director at North Greenville University,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I interacted with him a lot during our days at North Greenville when I was the sports editor for the Skyliner, which I don't think exists anymore.
I didn't know that.
So he tried to introduce a motion for transparency with the North American Mission Board with their finances. It was ruled out of order with some parliamentary kind of thing. What happened there?
I wish I understood parliamentary procedure even better, but my understanding is the wording on this. Let me go this. I'll go this way. Here's what he ultimately wants. He wants a good thing, that the messengers, those of us who show up, say to NAM, you're going to show us how you're spending your money. We're going to demand the transparency from you that we would demand from a government agency. We want to know who's getting paid what. We want to know where all your money is going because you get a lot of it. The International Mission Board gets the lion's share of Baptist money. Global missions get the lion's share. But then church planning is right there behind it here in North America. You have to write your resolution such that you can't ask trustees to do a given thing. You can't ask the executive committee. You have to ask it in a particular way. And I think Rhett Burns' desire is the right one and a good one. And we might just need to find a parliamentarian to write the exact language that he needs to propose. Because he also, at the state convention, you may not know this, I was at the state convention in Columbia. Wait, Columbia? Yeah. He went to a microphone there and said he wanted the South Carolina Baptist Convention to ask the National Convention to have NAM open their books and see. I think he was out of order there as well. So there's just a parliamentary procedure we got to figure out. Because consider for a second, how crazy is it that we have an entity getting, I don't think it's hundreds of millions, but tens of millions of dollars.
We have no idea where that's going. Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah. And then when they show up and their booth is, granted, it wasn't the entire race car. It was just the shell. However, it's not a good look when there's already questions about your financial transparency.
Sure. Yeah, I wasn't mad about the car, but I think they need to read the room. Yeah. The room is saying, guys, we're a little skeptical of you, and we wonder why you won't just tell us. Why are we even having to ask you? Why don't you just tell us anyway?
Right. It's this will probably get me in trouble with like 4 people, but it's similar to some of Donald Trump's antics. Is, if you're already getting fairly close to something that may possibly be illegal and you're talking about it loudly, how about you not do that? Especially in places that don't like you. And
this is just called wisdom. Just have some wisdom.
Yes, basic wisdom. So other things, let's see, on our list, you have you had on your list that I didn't have on mine because it just wasn't on my radar. There's sexual abuse reform stuff with the executive committee. Why don't you just go ahead and throw that out there?
Yeah, very short here. Won't take long. Good. This has just been a long saga. 2018, we met in Birmingham, and that's really when a lot of sexual abuse stories came to a head, where we found out that we had not a gigantic systemic problem. I don't want to overplay how big the problem was, but that was when the Houston Chronicle story came out that chronicled a lot of abuse stories in Southern Baptist churches. And we've been at every convention, 18, 19, again, we didn't have one in 20, 21, 22. We've been dealing with it and how task forces and various efforts. And they basically just finished their work. They presented to us that, we have this ministry. They finished the work they can do. This task force did and said, we got you some resources. Here's a curriculum that we want every Southern Baptist church to follow. We want to go through with your staff. Here are some videos, resources to use to prevent and then respond if something happens in abuse. And then now we have a ministry check website that is basically public knowledge so that if someone is applying to be a volunteer or a staff member, you can just check to see what kind of criminal record there is, or not just criminal record, but also a civil liability. I think that's what that's called. You could be criminally guilty or civilly liable in various sex abuse situations. And so they turned their work over and just said, all right, this is all we got. This is as far as we can go. The executive committee has to take it any further if they're going to take it any further. By the way, the executive committee is the thing that runs the Baptist convention year round. It's in Nashville. So that's it. Basically, I just want to report we kind of finished the work. I think they did good work. They turned in their work, and now we just got to carry on.
So basically, here's some steps to follow if a credible accusation happens, et cetera, et cetera. Saw some rumblings. There have been rumblings about this group. What is it? Guidepost.
Guidepost,
where they're leftists, just straight up. Happy Pride, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. What was the controversy there, and why did it matter in terms of SBC life?
Mostly we partnered with pagans. That's mostly why it mattered. And then let a pagan organization do a law firm do their investigations and do their recommendations to us without any kind of biblical authority. And there were other options. If someone put a resolution on the floor this time to require whatever third party law firms we use for anything, that their attorneys affirm the Baptist faith message. That we're actually going to stop working with people who might hate us, don't have our best interest as a convention. That was mostly the controversy, is they're just not mission aligned, and they got way too much power, way too much money from us, and could have gone a different way.
Right, but that's not an ongoing saga right now. That's done. The sexual abuse stuff, that's being taken care of. And there are preventative measures and responsive measures that have been put in place to help churches actually deal with these kinds of things. That when you deal with sinners, sin's going to happen, right? And so you want to deal with that sin as well as you can when it happens.
I just thought two more things on this. One was there was a moment there where it sounded like this ministry check website would have other categories. Like right now, we're going to have criminally guilty, civilly liable. But there was the idea of adding something called credibly accused. And the idea of who's going to determine what that is, that's
tricky there.
And also, you run into some biblical issues there. Like you can't just declare somebody.
It's like Michael Scott declaring bankruptcy.
Yeah, this is not legitimate. And so it looks like at least the abuse tax reform, they didn't recommend adding that. And so we got to be on guard for it just in case. But I think we finished that up. This is in part because the sexual abuse stuff has kind of concluded this convention. Is why it feels like next year in Dallas is going to be kind of boring. We're not going to have a presidential election properly. That sex abuse stuff is over. There's no law amendment. I don't even know why we're going to Dallas or what we're going to do.
It's just Dallas. It's not like it's in a liberal area of the country where you have to rile up all of the conservatives to go there and make sure that the whole convention doesn't fall apart. It's in Dallas.
It's Texas, you know? it's home field advantage.
So another interesting resolution was passed, and this resolution isn't binding, but effectively said, hey, in vitro fertilization, maybe don't do that. So, which is interesting. Like, this is one of those things that most evangelical Christians have been on the defensive about recently, particularly with the Alabama case. But historically, in vitro fertilization would be looked down upon by the entirety of church history. Obviously, we didn't have the technology, but when you're divorcing the reproduction of the human race from the actual covenantal act, that gets really problematic, especially with some of the methods. We'll just leave it at that. Some of the methods that are used in procuring the genetic material.
Yeah, Andrew Walker wrote it. I believe Al Mohler was part of that process as well. Andrew Walker is chief ethics professor at Southern Seminary in Louisville. You know, resolutions in Southern Baptist life, we like to say that they state the position of Southern Baptists. They don't shape the position of Southern Baptists. In that vein, I wish it required more than a 50% vote to pass any of them, but this one wouldn't have been close. I am encouraged by it. But let me say, I suspect vast majority of that vast majority that passed it, they hadn't thought about IVF seriously at all. Like this one felt like it was a convention shaper, not a convention stater.
Interesting.
Because it's just like the Catholics have talked about it a lot more than the Baptists have talked about it. We are late to the game in terms of documentation, and the Catholics call it encyclicals. Like this is not something we've spoken out about. And it's a bold move by Moeller and Walker in that, again, this is right after the Alabama case.
And this has been, Moeller's been on this for years. Like, yeah.
Okay, I'm not.
Yeah, he's talked about this on the briefing for a long, long time.
I know this is Baptist anathema. They might kick me out. I don't listen to the briefing. So
you might need to be rebaptized like every other Southern Baptist.
Into the convention. We have, we dunk them too. There's no sprinkling here. Who was I was going to say? Oh, yeah. This is at the exact moment that Ted Cruz and Katie Britt, Republicans, people that would typically represent more of a Christian value, they got a bill to protect IVF nationwide. And so I think Walker doing this was a bold move right now to say to political leaders, here's a big chunk of people that aren't with you on this, and think twice.
Right. Which, back to the Christian nationalism thing, how are we going to be governed if we're telling our representatives, hey, the Southern Baptists aren't with you on this particular issue? Well, that's Christians telling their representatives how they want to be governed, right? Like,
it is it's one of the models. I think that Owen Strand PDF is helpful here. He calls that the influence model, where, we're trying to influence ourselves into a more Christian nation. And that's one of the ways we did that at Southern Baptist Convention. I actually was not in the room for that vote, but reports from people I know said it was overwhelming. Like, it was a smattering of people who voted against it.
Good. So there was one other thing on the list of a committee being formed to study the effects of Reformed theology, particularly on seminaries, and they want to ban the thing, potentially.
It's a sweet older man that went to a microphone, and I wanted to bring it up because I thought it was fun. And if you haven't seen the memes yet, you got to find the memes.
Oh, man.
Because there was a young man, I put him my age, made his way behind the microphone where the guy was talking and just gave like the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson high eyebrow look. Like, what is this guy talking about? Because there was a moment in the room where, what is he saying? Is he really saying this? Because he went to the mic and said, I'd like to have the executive committee form a task force to study the effects of Calvinism/Reformed theology on the Southern Baptist Convention, how it's affecting our seminaries, and consider banning its teaching. I got rogue. I hate to tell this to this guy because he's probably I'd put him in his 70s. The 50 and under crowd of Southern Baptist pastors, they are, I bet, 75-25 Reformed. The 40 and under crowd, it's even higher. Like the younger you get in the convention, the more Reformed you get in all the various types of Reformed theology. I mean, we even had this one's maybe a smidge annoying. We had one, I thought, fairly anodyne resolution that was about just war, and saying Israel is, we support Israel's efforts to defend themselves. Hamas started it, and they're going to face their consequences of it. It was about just war and what's happening in the Middle East. One of the lines was the people the Jewish people having been chosen in the days of Abraham, which is just denotatively biblically factual. But a Reformed guy got up and said, nope, I want that taken out. Not God's chosen people, because there's a lot of us in here who are Reformed, and that's not how we think about the Jews. And so anyway, the younger you get, the more Reformed you get thinking about.
Right, absolutely. So all things considered, should conservatives leave the SBC?
Not right now. There might be a moment that could come, but
I think that was more of a question several years ago when things like critical race theory were being approved in resolutions and stuff like that. Yes.
Whatever drift people were worried about in, call it 17, 18, 19, there has been a grasping of the wheel. Let's talk about drift, right? If you just drift to left, you take your hands off your steering wheel, you start drifting to the left. There's been hands on the wheel again. We pulled it back. And again, the way you judge that over time is who gets put on your boards of trustees, because boards of trustees are the ones that make big decisions for your entities. They're the ones that choose your leaders. And as long as messengers continue to choose strong presidents, those presidents will continue to choose strong leaders. When I say strong, I do mean theologically conservative. So no, right now, there's no reason. Conservative folks should be very, I left encouraged, at least for that one thing I started with. The two least conservative presidential candidates were just decimated in the first ballot. It wasn't, they were this tiny little group of people. And I hope the folks who do tend theologically left in the SBC left discouraged, recognizing you're nothing in this convention. There's not a lot of you. Your numbers are small.
Literally 9-10% in terms of not booting the churches that have female pastors, right? And so the actual leftward drift, it would seem, is shrinking in the SBC. That influence is dwindling quickly.
That took effort. I mean, there's some people we should credit. If you don't know about Mike Stone down in Georgia, he ran and lost, but he was part of bringing some things up that needed to get brought up.
And to his credit, that guy got railroaded a couple of years ago. Like he was the victim, and I'm not saying he's a perfect guy or anything, or that he comported himself perfectly in every situation, but he outright had his character assassinated by so many people. And now we can look back and say, oh yeah, he was right about a lot of things.
Well, I think Al Mohler he was he led the conservative resurgence, but getting us fully back on track. And I would also include, Bart in this. He made some mistakes, but he was a good conciliatory figure that did choose good leaders for committees. Theological conservatives have a big home in Southern Baptist Convention, and I'm just hopeful for that for many years to come.
Absolutely. Well, Cory, I know that we do content together often, to say the least. But for those who aren't familiar with you, where can they find you?
CoryTruax.com is out there. I don't do much there except post the podcast episode. So you can find the podcast in actual podcast places like Spotify and Apple and where else people listen to podcasts? Pocket Casts. I
use Overcast myself. It's the best.
I've never even tried Overcast, but wherever you find podcasts, you can listen to the Cory Truax Show. Just look for me. And I also have sermons out there I've been preaching this month through Hebrews. So thank you for the opportunity for self-promotion.
Absolutely.
Wherever you find podcasts, just look for my weird name.
That is literally this entire podcast is just shameless self-promotion all the time. So, Cory, thanks for coming on and doing our annual tradition. And for those of you out there listening, watching, etc., go love God, love your neighbor, and make some music. We'll see you next time.